I'm super excited to welcome you to Search in 2026 and beyond. Today's webinar, I'm excited for because we have Chris who's joining me, who teaches me things every time we go through things. So as we wait for people to join, go ahead and put in the chat, where are you joining us from? I'm joining you from a very sunny but cold Guelph, Ontario, Canada. Chris, I know you're also on the East Coast. So we got good East Coast representation. So go ahead and put in the chat where you're joining from. Oh, we have some other Canadians here, people from across Ontario and Vancouver. Ohio, welcome, Jason. Nashville, Quebec, love it. So we should get a good international audience here. We want to make sure that we also address questions. So if you have questions, please make sure that you're going ahead and putting those in the chat. I will either interject Chris when he's sharing some of his knowledge bombs, or we'll address them at the end. So just go ahead and put them in there. Oh, we got some people from the West Coast. I'm sure it's beautiful and sunny there. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, my name is Martha Van Berkel. This is my knowledge graph. So as someone who speaks in connected data layers and structured data, I like to introduce myself by explaining who I am and how I'm connected to other things in the world. You can see at the bottom, I do have a technical background. I went to MIT and I have a degree in applied math and engineering. I am Canadian and I am the CEO and co-founder here at Schema app. But I spent 14 years at Cisco. And so I really grew up in enterprise. And this kind of goes to our topic today, which is, how do we prepare, right? And what are we should be thinking of leaders in the enterprise as we think of this sort of broad and changing world of AI? Now, fun fact about me is I used to drive a 1965 Austin Healey Sprite. And my car was in the movie called Losing Chase that was directed by Kevin Bacon. And so Kevin Bacon actually used to drive my car. And I love sharing this because it explains how defining relationships enable you to do inferencing or to figure out that you can win that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon game. So just like AI, just like search does to have accuracy and sort of brand answers, that's exactly what we do here at Schema App with regards to structured data. Now, without further ado, let me introduce or hand it over to Chris to go ahead and introduce himself.
Thank you, Martha. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be with you today, and thanks, Martha and team, for welcoming on this session. So my name is Chris Philp. I help lead our SEO and AI search program across Dentsu. It's an incredibly exciting time. I think for me personally, it's been probably the most interesting 5 years of my whole career within SEO, just because of the amount of really spotlight that we've got within the platform. I graduated from Edinburgh, so that's the accent that you can hear. Born and raised there. I moved to London around 2010. But during that period, around 2009, I interned for a company, and I actually wrote or contributed to a book around social listening. And it feels for me like a very full circle moment, because at the time, search was very much about index and retrieval. It wasn't really about how a brand showed up. And with that kind of background and understanding, and really vying and desperately seeking insight into how brands show up within search, within AI now, we've got that full circle moment that we're able to actually see not just where you rank, but how you're really being represented. So that's super exciting for me. And then on a personal note, as it relates to cycling, I promise this isn't a picture of me. I'm not necessarily into the spandex, but I did get in cycling over COVID. 6 weeks after getting my bike, I did get run over, but got back on the saddle again. So managed to stay strong, but super excited to talk about some of the way that AI is shaping search and some of the way that agents are interacting.
Love that. There's like, we could probably talk bikes. I had a time in my life where I did lots of triathlons. So also got to wear my spandex all the time. Tell me a little bit more, just like I want to frame, because you have so many, I would say, like broad and unique perspectives on how you're seeing this kind of new landscape. Tell us a little bit more about what you do at Dentsu today.
Sure. So it's really about making sure that we understand at the core level, what is it that is happening from a behavioral standpoint, and how are the advances in technology shaping that? I think fundamentally, search is still happening in similar ways. I think, for example, back to the early days of Google, people were inputting questions in really long form, and they were effectively taught to speak and search much more in those head terms. So we're almost going back to that natural language approach. So it's really about making sure that we can understand the broad data of what consumers are looking for, and making sure that we're marrying that up to what our brands are offering. So I think the biggest thing that we're seeing now is that it's not just about having a product, but it's really about articulating the proposition of the brand in a much more effective way relative to the competition to basically sort out that messy middle, as Google calls it. So that's really what we are trying to do is marry what consumers are looking for to how brands can deliver against that.
Amazing. So let's dive in, right? So with that, and sort of with this being sort of what you do every day with some of the world's largest brands, we could see this as a risk or an opportunity, right? Sort of as we think about AI search. Talk to me how you're thinking about this kind of bigger change and how that's working with some of the organizations that you're working with.
I mean, I think as it relates to risk or opportunity, it really is both. It really does fundamentally require some of the same basic principles of traditional SEO. I think there are a lot of elements of unfortunate snake oil within the industry of repackaging certain components as new AI specific things. There are definitely elements of overlap, and there are unequivocally elements that require net new work, net new enhancements. But I think fundamentally, it's about making sure again that you understand what is it that people are searching for and how are you delivering against that. Again, there's a number of new metrics, new platforms, new ways of looking at data. And I think for now, we've talked as SEOs long about the importance of connecting with other marketing channels. Right now, it's non-negotiable. We need to be at the table with PR, with branding, with content, with IT and development, as we always have been. But all of those groups need to work together collectively to really win within AI. So the risk is really being not only not present, but being potentially relayed in a harmful way.
Yeah, when you talk about this, I think about brand trust too, right? So, which is ironic that we're talking about human emotions, right? That tie to sort of this like new world with machines. And one of the concepts that we've been tossing around here at Schema App is this idea of brand in the loop, right? So, when you talk about PR and you talk about technical SEO and you talk about all the different teams, it's like, how are they collaborating to build trust and to have control points sort of for sort of how the brand is showing up. So they're like the owned, this is like the old sort of owned versus paid, right? But that like owned element is allowing for that consistency, that clarity to then allow them to build trust because they're consistent and bringing clarity sort of across these platforms. So that's sort of like some of the ways I'm thinking about it. How does that resonate with you?
No, it's exactly it. And some of the ways that we've been talking about it internally at the agency level is two kind of sides of it. There's control, to your point, exactly that element of owned. How can you control exactly what's being articulated? But within the AI world, influence is such a critical part because you can tell your consumer all day long what you think of yourself. But what we're seeing now is the likes of Reddit and other social posts are being integrated into the results. So you need to understand how are you actually perceived in addition to how are you talking about yourselves, because those two things might be at odds and you need to make sure that you understand what you can control, which again I think is where the likes of Schema App come in really wonderfully, is that we can articulate and own the elements of technical, of content on site and make sure that it's well structured. But the influence part is really about, again, connecting to the social teams, the PR teams, the branding teams, to make sure that there's that deep connection across the messaging.
Because our purpose is meaningful connections. I'm loving that this like AI kind of, move is requiring organizations to actually connect more internally, right? Like more human interaction in order to control sort of how brands are understood. Let's shift gears a little bit because there's lots of debate on sort of like what do we call this thing, right? I think there's been hundreds of posts. Is SEO dead? What's GEO? What's AEO? What are your thoughts on sort of what we should be calling this, or how do we organize some of this, almost like taxonomy of language around sort of defining this for our internal stakeholders, or perhaps the people we work with?
So I think going a step back a little bit, I think the world of SEO and the remit of SEO has broadened so much. It's no longer just about Google and search in your website. We have to really look at it much more broadly because there's so many different interaction points for search specifically. So from a Dentsu level, one of the ways that we're looking at it is rather than being search engine optimizers, we're looking at search experience. So
Love
we
that.
wanted to limit some of the way that we're annoying the industry as far as different acronyms. We are contributing somewhat with our framing of LLMO. Again, we're not precious about it, but we feel that that's certainly much more encompassing to the AI search experience. And as it relates to various terminologies, AEO, GEO, AIO even, again, there's so many different potential nuances or layers that those kind of capture. again, as it relates to generative, those are much more, in my opinion at least, about the generative content experiences and net new content being created. Answer engine is much more akin to the likes of quick answers of old. So from that perspective, it's about making sure that we can understand conceptually as we're speaking to each other, what is it that we're specifically talking about, which again, for us is why we want to opt for the umbrella term of LLMO. But as part of that, again, we have to understand that there's verticalized search in travel, real estate, commerce. We have to understand that there's specialized search within local, social, video, or app. And of course, the agentic experiences are continuing to evolve as well. So it's really becoming a much bigger and broader area of expertise that is required of the search engine practitioner.
This is where the opportunity comes up, right? This is truly where, like, this is much bigger now. This is a, more, more collaboration, more areas of expertise, which means that, again, we have to sort of like go deeper, right? And sort of understanding sort of the how. I often like kind of recentering ourselves on sort of, well, what is the consumer experience like, right? How is like the consumer journey changing? And while I know that, the numbers we're seeing, clicks are disappearing, I saw some recent studies that were showing that, when you look at sort of traffic coming through Google, we're still seeing conversions happen and traffic coming to the website, whereas we're not seeing that on ChatGPT and others. Talk to me a little bit about how you're seeing this landscape, and then I'll chime in a little bit about sort of agents and where I see that changing.
Sure. So I think part of it is the fact that it's still, relatively speaking, a new technology, and it still doesn't necessarily have its footing as far as its exact end point. The commerce component, the ads component, is still incredibly new within these platforms, and they started very much as it relates to the organic conversational content creation support. But they're trying to evolve, and you're seeing all these different platforms kind of go at different paces, try to find their niche.
Yeah.
And in some ways, they're trying to an extent, and not necessarily directly, but they're replicating some of what Google has built by creating such a broad infrastructure and ecosystem where you've got your email, you've got your commerce experiences, you've got your maps, location components. So they're trying to find out what works for them that allows them to connect that experience. So part of the reason right now is that people are still testing out. They're trying to determine how trustworthy is this, how much of the research are you doing that's validating, and how can we really trust that messy middle is being taken care of effectively. But even as it relates to the modality, there's still evolutions continuing to happen. There's still hallucinations, but I think that's probably why for now we're still seeing that limited number overarchingly from a traffic standpoint right now.
Yeah, I was, you and I were talking prior to the session, but it's funny because like we know Bing and Google have done this also at scale. Like there's also complexities that come over 20 years of, working with the data, the amount of data, right, that's going on. And so I think it'll be interesting, especially in the next 12 months, to see sort of, who are those kind of competitors or those new platforms that are they're going to stay around, right? Or are we going to see some consolidation? I think that will kind of be really interesting. I also, one of the other things that I think is really interesting, sort of in, we talk about like agentic and kind of, controlling the brand sort of through data, which, is what we do again at Schema app and through our work. But I think we're also seeing so many new standards come out too, right? E-com is one area that's, we're seeing sort of move quickly sort of through the agentic side, right? So through kind of the consumer buying experience. And it's funny, I know it's not, it's search in a different way, but like as I'm watching, Mr. Beast games last night, the final, I have these pop-ups coming through the TV telling me to buy like what they're advertising. And I share that because it's this like interactive play, right? Like, why would I think about shopping while watching TV? But then, I click it and it goes into my Amazon cart, right? And then I can just go ahead and buy it, or I can just buy it right off the TV. And I think this sort of like where we search, right? Where we discover, where we buy, especially as the agentic stuff comes through, or the agentic kind of, we see more agents actively kind of taking action. It's going to be really interesting. And I think it's going to start in sort of, again, our everyday e-com, buying the things that we need every day.
No, I think that makes sense. I'm seeing some questions here. So I can answer the one about the influence in the buyer journey.
Sure.
So I think from that perspective, sorry, I just clicked answered, I've not. But as it relates to the buyer journey, I think that's where we need to, again, understand the broader ecosystem. So as it relates right now, a lot of people's expectations are really around searching for a product. But with the likes of Instagram, with the likes of TikTok, there's that component of pushing some inspiration element. So it's not all geared towards search. But to your point there, Martha, as far as watching Beast
Beast
Games,
games.
and then being kind of triggered into an experience, it's about making sure that we understand those points and opportunities of where there's a trigger going to be happening, and how can we start to maybe map that back to those experiences. So on the next piece about the personalization, and speaking to the individual, one of the things that we're really trying to do is make sure that you as a brand are articulating your propositions as effectively as possible, because we can't within search speak to every single individual at the individual level. But what we can do is try to understand the audience at the core level. What are their motivators? What are their consumption habits or behaviors? How do they think about your brand? How are you perceived? Utilizing various platforms like Profound, Brighthead, etc., to get that insight. And then making sure that, again, as far as your articulation, you're able to speak to them at least at the broadest level, which allows you to speak in some ways relative to their needs and motivations and some of their desires.
To me, it feels a little full circle to when we were in the world of voice, right? And we were talking about how we can identify some of those, I'll call them long tail queries because that's the words but like those niche personalized questions and sort of interactions, and how we were seeing those come in the data, right? As we were in sort of the voice world, it'll be really interesting because we don't have some of that data, right? We don't have some of those metrics as to like what's interacting. But if we kind of wear our SEO hats and we think about, well, we know how our customers are searching today, that in that long tail, in that sort of very personalized kind of long form way, might that help us then inform how things are going to interact when we get to this agentic mode. So it's sort of like, again, like how do we bridge the data we have today to kind of get into this new world. I'll talk about one more thing, and then we're going to talk a little bit about measures and metrics. The other hypothesis I have, and this kind of plays, I think, to what you're talking about, Chris, around that kind of collaborative approach for brands. I do think local is going to have this resurgence because I joke, like when I go purchase something like clothing, I still want to like try it on and feel it and kind of know how it's going to work with me. And so while the marketing, I think, is going to get really personalized, I think there's also going to be this yearning for human connection that will then sort of have an impact on how brands market and how brands interact with their consumers. What are your thoughts there?
No, I think that's exactly it. And even taking that step towards that personalization component, again, it's going to be about access and acceptability from a consumer standpoint with the likes of Universal Context Protocol, MCP protocols. Those are going to basically invite opportunities for you to ingest your history, your preferences
Yeah.
in a way that you can then start to get messages back from brands that are much more specifically personalized using, again, AI connection points and protocols. So there's going to be opportunities to speak directly, again, assuming that there's that component of privacy. I suspect that the European markets are going to have a much bigger challenge with that, for example.
Mhm.
But within the US, I think there's every chance that we'll see almost that one-to-one correlatory management. But I think we've seen even in the news recently, there are hacks that continue to happen. There is manipulation of these AI. So while there is a high degree of trust that continues to be cited, I think there's a lot of skepticism, at least right now, that people should still have as it relates to having their exact question answered.
Cool. All right, we're going to keep going. I see a couple more questions, but we'll come to those in a minute. So let's talk a little bit about metrics, because this is a big topic, right? What can we use today? How should we look at it again with that kind of more holistic view? Chris, why don't you walk us through how you and Dentsu are thinking about it?
Sure. So we love an acronym. We love alliteration. So we've got the three Ps when it comes to what we look at beyond traffic as a measurement framework. So it really does begin with prominence. And that's some of the more basic or standard metrics around visibility, share of voice. That includes rank, for example, from a traditional standpoint, as well as within different AI platforms, as far as different topics, categories, etc. There's then citations, first-party citations. Is your brand, your website being cited within the answer? Is a third party citing you from a branding standpoint? And again, this is where it's not necessarily like links exactly, but it's very akin to it. Frequency of mentions, that's really seemingly important. The freshness and the volume and velocity of citation for certain categories is really crucial. And again, are you really a depth and authority, a leader within the space. So are you creating content completeness? And that's not just about creating 500-word articles. Are you delivering on the expectation from a modality standpoint? The element, the P that really excites me is perception. And I think this is an element that SEOs haven't really been able to touch in the past. And it's really around brand presence from a representation standpoint. Are we able to influence in a much more meaningful way? Because again, it's not just about ranking anymore. It's about making sure that we understand the sentiment and perception of the brand. Are you being represented and cited in a way that matches your expectations? Do your customers think of you in the same way? What are the competitive sets look like? And is there credibility there? Are you able to use your propositions to help influence? Is there accuracy? We've seen that certain brands are being misrepresented relative to either the product suites or their brand voice. There's a lot of spamming within the industry. And again, that final point, are you able to articulate your brand voice? You can't just put the product forward. You have to make sure to demonstrate what it is about your brand and your product specifically that's better than the competition. And again, from a purpose standpoint, the final P here, we have to make sure that everything that we're doing has value to the bottom line for our clients. It has to drive a business outcome. We have to understand the impact and effectiveness. And you spoke there, Martha, earlier about the fact that right now there's still such limited traffic from these AI platforms, but we know that behavior is continuing to evolve. It's continuing to resonate with consumers. So we need to make sure to understand not just what it's driving itself, but what it's driving in relation to traditional search, in relation to other marketing channels. How is it engaging with paid, for example? So we're starting to see these evolutions take place as far as engagement, what the value is, what the opportunities are. And really, really critically against all of this, it's about making sure that we understand the brand health. That's a metric that I would say hasn't necessarily been always top of mind from an organic standpoint, but it's really, really critical to make sure that we can support that.
If you were to sort of break down like what makes up brand health, like what would be some of the things that like, people joining us today can kind of start exploring that might kind of contribute to that?
So I think at the very basic level, any brand could, for example, search what is X brand known for? What is my brand known for? What are the issues with it? Because we can see now a very clear articulated view of the comparisons between other competitors. We can see very clearly articulated the strengths, whether it's about the brand, the services, the products, whether it's price, efficiency, speed to delivery, things like that. So we can see what people perceive as being challenges as well as what the strengths are. So from that perspective, it's about determining, can we address it through content, through maybe clarification of a point, or is it maybe a bigger business issue that maybe delivery fees are too expensive from a consumer standpoint? So at the business level, maybe that's something that needs to be addressed, or it's something that simply has to be accepted as a continued pain point.
Yeah, so I love this sort of like how can we use AI to discover what the perception is to then identify perhaps those, I'll call them big rocks that are, perhaps things that are being cited or, responded on a practical basis that are probably not like a number, but perhaps it's like, oh, they're really slow on overnight delivery, or their customer service, doesn't allow certain things, right? Sometimes something about the experience. That's really interesting. Like when I think about metrics, so much of it is, kind of starting at that purpose piece, right? Really thinking about like, what are the website metrics? Because so many of the like AI platforms today are lacking metrics, right? So if we were to try to kind of be the practical pieces of, great, I'm getting, clicks or whatever on my website, but I want to actually see like what's an impression in ChatGPT or what's an impression. And while Bing sort of just like brought out some new ones, I think it's so hard, right? And yet there's so much attention by executives on, what are you doing to drive visibility? So I know we've all had to be creative. I know new platforms out there like Profound and Scrunch was another one someone mentioned yesterday, are sort of helping try to define that space that I feel are sort of like good on a directional basis, but they're not sort of necessarily like they're kind of new metrics or kind of hypothesis metrics maybe is the way. What are your thoughts on sort of those metrics for like brand visibility that are coming out of these platforms today, and how should people think about them?
No, I think that's exactly right, and it leads to one of the questions here around perception, for example. So first and foremost, there's a lot of new platforms within the industry as far as tracking all these different types of things. The unfortunate thing right now is that from a data perspective, it's still very much a black box. So a lot of these platforms are using clickstream data to get some of the impression as far as scraping the search pages and things like that, the results. So there is some element of validity that I think is definitely proximal enough that we can infer accuracy. One of the big things that's going to continue to be a challenge is that these AI platforms don't have availability of data like Google AdWords, for example. They don't have Search Console. They don't have quality guidelines. So a lot of the problem is that there's a lot of manipulation that is really a high potential, and we're seeing it within the industry. There is almost an approach to early 2000s SEO to try
Yes.
to basically understand the algorithm, spam it, and gain gains. But one of the problems with that is that that is maybe going to see some immediate gains from a performance standpoint. But I have every suspicion that that is not going to last long, and that could lead to significant impact and penalty, not just within the AI platforms, but against traditional search. So I think we have to try to gather what data we can from these various platforms. But from a tactic standpoint, we have to be very careful to continue to really be what I would say above board as far as strategy.
Perfect transition, Chris, to what we had planned to kind of talk about next. So why don't you, people are, and we'll get to some more of these questions, but like what are some of the things we can do and that we do control and that we know about? Of course, your number one is my favorite. It's about schema markup. It's what, schema app does at scale for enterprise, but I'll hand it over to you. What are the things that we can action today to kind of make sure we're making the moves for our
No,
brands?
of course. And again, we've got these kind of four criteria that we set to make sure that we can deliver against AI search, but they really are rooted in overarching search performance as well. And it does begin, as you say, with that technical component. We need to make sure that that element that you can control from your experience is is structured in such a way that it can be indexed properly, it can be crawled by the AI agents as well as search agents. And what they really, really thrive on is that organized, architected information, which again, schema, structured markup data is so, so crucial. And again, that's why we've partnered with Schema App to be able to help our brands and clients deliver against those types of requirements. There's a number of new processes, protocols launched, such as LLMS.txt. There's a number of different things that are still being tested. There's not necessarily what I would call a standardized, accepted process or requirement, but they're going to start to emerge, and they're going to start to likely be accepted within the industry as the norms. So that really does begin that foundational piece. From a
Chris,
content standpoint,
before we go to content, let's answer the question that came up, right?
no, sure.
What are your thoughts on sort of markdown for agents, LLMs.text? I know I have my opinion, but do you want to chime in?
Sorry, I'm trying
So
to understand.
markdown for agents, Cloudflare announced last week sort of like a new markdown. So it's sort of like just marking down, having almost like a summary version of what's in the HTML. My opinion is it's still lacking a lot of context. And for me, this is the same thing I said at SMX Advanced last year when I got asked about LLMs.text is, these are really smart machines. And so, to give it a summary piece that frankly only takes like 2 lines of JavaScript for anybody to write today, to me doesn't seem like it's going to be helpful in answering specific personalized questions or take actions, which is what we're going to talk about next around agentic. And therefore, while I think like maybe it helps for sort of like the low level kind of first crawls, I don't see it playing a kind of brand control building trust move. Thoughts?
No, I completely agree with that. I appreciate you providing the context there as well. And I think fundamentally we need to make sure that brands aren't, I don't want to say tricked, but they're not talked into creating net new experiences for LLMs. Fundamentally,
Mm,
everything that we're doing within the website is to serve humans. And if you do these fundamentals correctly, it can also directly serve the AI engines and bots as well. So we want to make sure that you create those principles so you don't have to recreate an
love that.
experience that's summarized elsewhere. Because again, to your point, we need to make sure that we take all of these components and make them work rather than creating two. Especially most of our brands struggle to create scalable content in a meaningful way that's not just AI slop, for example. So to try to then replicate an experience and do that twice, it's going to be impossible for brands to truly manage. So that for us is something that we want to make sure to avoid to the best extent possible. And one thing I would say, just as far as labeling for AI agents as well, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with it, but ARIA labels, which are really an accessibility component that supports not just the alt text, for example, but it's really about the button navigations. ARIA labels are definitely heavily used by agents, much more, for
Love that.
example. So that accessibility feature that might have been an optional for AI agents is incredibly valuable.
Oh my goodness, what a win, right? Like, so make your site accessible and make it ready for the future. All right, let's
That's
go
it.
back. You had four things. I asked you a question after you talked about like that technical foundation. Talk to us a little bit about number two.
Sure. So content is critical. And again, it really does speak to the fact that we need to understand again, are you able to address your customer needs and mindsets? It's not just a case simply of having the keyword within the page and making sure that we have that. We really need to make sure that we're understanding again those mindsets, like able to speak towards specific consumer needs and make sure that we understand what do we have a right to win in, what do we have a right to play in, and where are maybe the elements that we won't succeed, so maybe should pull back and scale back on. The third piece here is really about brand. And again, content and brand have to be really hyper connected. Are we able to articulate the brand positioning? Are you able to define your services, your offerings versus the competition? And are you driving towards influence from a broader marketing standpoint within things that really help motivate consumers towards that endpoint? And again, we talked about the purpose piece measurement. It really is the underpinning component. We have to make sure that everything that we're doing, everything that we're prioritizing is reading towards the right measures of success, whether that's a conversion, whether that's a sale, whether it's a KPI, a lead form. We have to make sure that it's all delivering against that. Right now, we're almost a little bit faithful, I would say, as it relates to focusing on AI. But if we're able to continue those fundamentals within SEO and enhance those expectations as far as where we see behaviors leading, I think we're going to see a lot of success.
Right. It's I think elevating those SEO questions to be more around intent, thinking of personas and like more specificity, right? While doing all the things sort of that we do. When we talk about structured data sort of being that like critical piece, and we're super excited about the opportunity to partner with Dentsu. But it's also because like Google, those that have been doing this for a long time are saying like do it. And part of it is not just like use structured data, but they're also talking about it being critical for these modern features. And Gemini is one of the leading platforms that's doing this. They're also talking about efficiency, and I love sort of the research that we've come across, whether that be Gardner and others, talking about how knowledge graphs, right, connected data, which is actually what structured data we do at Schema does, actually makes it more efficient. So when we talk about ChatGPT's biggest challenge is getting to profitability and doing this efficiently, while they haven't documented it yet, we expect that they'll also start using this. And it's not just Google, it's also Microsoft. They're using it and sort of being very articulate about making sure that they're, machine readable content, right? And a lot of this, again, is around context. So I loved your second focus on content. To me, the other piece is like within the content, if we're making it human readable, like we get the context because we have all, these elaborate brains, right, that understand the question we're asking and where we're searching. But that context is what sort of we bring sort of with structured data. And I think that's a lot of, again, the same reasons why we're seeing Microsoft push it. Now, the other one is, and we've talked about agentic, our last topic is like where the agentic world's going. I find it fascinating that, Microsoft's CTO is talking about the agentic web and talking about sort of, I'll say, like the primary big components, right? As we think about preparing for this. And their open agentic endpoint project, NL Web, is actually using structured data to inform their vector database. And I love this because this is now, as we talked about the role of SEO within a brand and like us thinking about data and how do we think of that data layer as being strategic, we're seeing, Microsoft like connecting those dots and found the founder who started schema.org, RV Guha, is who is leading kind of the agentic web project NL Web at Microsoft. And someone asked me recently, Martha, why are you so excited about Microsoft? Right? Like we often talk in the SEO world about how perhaps they're laggards. I think what I'm most excited about this is that it's an open project, right? So much is closed, right? And when we think about build trust, governance, making sure, enterprises as we go into this, that we can do that governance that's going to be so important. The fact that it's an open project, that people can collaborate on it, that it's going to be transparent with regards to how it's working, what the elements are. That's what gets us excited about it. Chris, I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
No, it's exactly it. And again, I think you and I in the industry has been beating the drum about schema and structured markup for the longest time since it was obviously launched. And again, it's about making it as simple as possible for not just humans, but fundamentally for crawlers, because they're not perfect. So we have to give them every option and every tool available to help organize the information and deliver it to the consumers in the right way. So from that perspective, any additional context layer, again, that we can control is going to help support what we want to be present for as it relates to the competition. again, across so many brands I work with and so many competitive sites we run analyses on, so few properly implement the full power of schema and structured data. And it's such a miss because it's, again, one of those elements that can move the needle as it relates to performance against content.
I've been doing this for a decade. Preaching to the choir, but yeah, let's do it, right? And let's I love it also because it's a control point, right? So in this time where so much is unknown and we can't see the metrics, or we don't, we can't coordinate all the things. It's something very tactical, right? That is very strategic kind of in the long run. Thoughts on the agentic web? Like my thoughts are, like this is happening today, right? Like we're seeing it through, universal commerce protocol, partnerships coming out between Shopify and Google and others. To me, this is we've kind of moved beyond the semantic web, which is understanding the web, to the agentic web, where now actions are happening. I know here at Schema App, like we're super excited about this. So we have, already an MCP server that has that, semantic vector database ready for, enterprises to use that data in other ways. We're also testing NL Web and early adopters of getting our customers to use that. What are your thoughts on like how quick this is going to happen? And then we'll shift into some more questions.
No, I mean, I think it's incredibly exciting, like you say. I think fundamentally, we obviously as marketers have to look at it in two ways. One is how can we leverage it to help our work be more efficient, more automated, and get more deep, meaningful insights. So with the likes of MCP, making sure that we can understand, can this effectively support our ability to crawl and audit content, for example, and the performance thereof. From a consumer standpoint, it's again about that connectivity towards action. So we have to make sure that we look at it in both views. But from a consumer standpoint, again, there's still such newness to it all from a usability standpoint. And I think part of the thing is, even with the likes of the Walmart relationship with OpenAI, initially upon launch, they were only able to add a single item, for example. So there are still a lot of restrictions as it relates to the value that consumers have, the way for them to make it an easy, frictionless experience. So I think it's going to continue to evolve rapidly, but one of the potential hesitations or things I'd be very mindful of is how can brands continue to deliver branded experiences within those
Mm,
protocols? Because again, we spoke about social being a trigger. We talked about Beast Games being a
yeah.
trigger from a search standpoint. We know that there's going to be searches that happen within AI, but we need to make sure that there's opportunities for brands to deliver against those trigger moments. And within an agentic commerce protocol, if you're shopping within the AI agent itself, how can you as a brand deliver some of that experience that helps the user browse? And you mentioned earlier, even shops are still a really critical thing from a physical
Yeah.
location standpoint. Websites similarly are going to continue to be important. Yes, traffic is declining and it will probably decline a little bit further, but it's not going to go away. And the website architecture, the foundations of it, are going to continue to be really essential to the web moving forward.
When you talk about that experience, I think about when you buy a Mac or an Apple product and how they've like designed the experience of opening the box, right? If you've ever done this, like they're very thoughtful about sort of like the messages, the feel of the product, like even like the containers, and it makes I'm excited because there's sort of like a whole new realm of design that might kind of come out of this for that kind of human connection. I love this question from Christopher asking about like how do we feel about like does AI over pollute the journey like that we're seeing? Like where's and it's like maybe the spammy kind of play, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's my biggest personal risk and potential immediate frustration is that there's so much happening and there's so many tests happening, as it did within early days of Google, of people trying to kind of spam, flex, and break the algorithm to determine how easily can we manipulate this right now and how much content, what velocity, what scale do we need to create. So you're seeing a lot of Reddit posts, a lot of spam posts, a lot of mess in the internet as far as how to try to figure out ways to manipulate the industry. So I think we're seeing that, and it's almost like the intentional hallucinations that we saw back in the day of like AI suggesting we eat
Yeah.
rocks as part of a healthy diet. We're seeing now people spam to try to determine how can we really break the algorithm and make it work. But I hope that all that leads to some kind of creation of quality guidelines that means there's the reduction in spam, there's a reduction in manipulation, and that the right brands really do come to the surface in a meaningful way.
Yeah, this sort of kind of goes into the next question that both Olivia and Jason are kind of asking. And this is more sort of like, well, what are then the tactics, right? So if it's not about spamming, it's not about sort of just making a whole bunch of generative AI content. I like to think about sort of thinking about being an authority on a topic and thinking about like what are those questions humans are asking about a topic. And then, we can get nerdy in SEO and be like, are we talking about the right entities? Like as we talk about those topics, any sort of tactic you can give us today that you're thinking of or the teams at Dentsu are thinking of that
Yeah,
these
I
people should
think
leave with?
part of it is the legacy SEOs will always say we need to understand what keywords are people searching for, the categories, all that kind of stuff. But I think it really does much more matter about the intent relative to your brand, your product, your vertical. What are the trigger points? What are the consumer touch points? What are the things that they care about? Is it comparison? Is it price? Is it a motivating factor like that? We have to understand again the entirety of the consumer journey and where there's potential trigger points that can help influence that. So as it relates to our focus, it needs to be really around delivering content, experiences, and products that map against those specific touch points. What are the intent triggers? How can we support, again, from search and from marketing that will help deliver that completeness, I would say.
I love that your answer is like focus on the humans, right? Like it's sort of like let's get back to like what are the real kind of tangible things, right? So if we're building content, if we're doing entity linking and schema markup, if we're doing link building, if we're managing reputation on socials, it should all be in the service of sort of answering those human questions, right? That's
Exactly.
that's sort of my version of what you just said.
No, it's exactly it. And I think what we've seen is, as if everyone recalls, the Google's messy middle, that there's maybe the trigger point question, and there's the research, and then there's the back and forth. AI agents are effectively taking that messy middle and flattening the funnel to an extent, but they still have to go through that process of determining through their own research, through query fan out, through the process of assessments of various assets, whether or not this is the right thing to serve, again, the human. So that's where we can't just simply focus on the product itself and try to circumvent the idea of creating content that delivers those experiences. It all adds up.
That's so cool. There's another question here around any insights on prepping for multimodal AI.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of seeing flashes of it to an extent already, and again, similar to that search experience, it's not just about keywords anymore, but we see that there's so much better ability for these agents in search generally to understand imagery, to be able to correlate the impact of it. So it's about making sure that you understand from your consumer standpoint what is it that they're looking for, because we know that when somebody's searching for something, they don't always, as I said earlier, want a 500-word article. It
Yeah.
might be an initial question. There might be the need for some of your demographic to deliver the content in a video. It might be that they prefer to consume it within social. So I think that's really, again, going back to that intent perspective is what is it that you're saying and what is the right way to say it and where to deliver the answer in the best format. So it's going to be difficult because brands are going to have to create a lot of content and maybe redigest it in some ways of long form videos reutilized in short form in various ways, repurposing it with a kind of quick response. But it's about making sure that you make whatever you create work harder.
Amazing. I love that. If people want to connect with you, Chris, where should they go look?
Yeah, feel free to reach out here on LinkedIn, or you can email me directly on chris.philp@dentsu.com. I see there's a number of questions, so apologies that we couldn't get to them all. I'd be happy to try to respond maybe in a summary, Martha, from the group for any that we missed, but I certainly appreciate the time and you having me here today.
Yeah, I think the ARIA stuff is interesting. If there's like any research or kind of resources, we can make sure we capture those and then make those
So I can
available.
I can very quickly support that one with a little bit of an answer. So one of the reasons that ARIA labels even became a prominent consideration is from log file analysis, looking at what AI engines are interacting with. So that log file analysis, you can see, I'm sure, from some outputs from WordPress, for example, they determined that those sites with ARIA labels had user agents actually navigate much more successfully and deeper on sites. So it's not going to necessarily be a make or break, but it's something that, again, a lever that if you can control, you absolutely should.
Amazing. If you want to connect with me, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. You can find me, or also feel free to reach out, martha@schemaapp.com. And my team put together an ebook around mastering AI search, essential strategies and insights. Talks a lot about structured data, big surprise, because that's what we do here at Schema App. If we can help you sort of prepare your brand with schema markup at scale so that you're ready to manage that data layer and take control, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, Chris, and have a super day.
Thank you, everyone.